Powell.
And we both are very appreciative of you all taking time out of your Saturday morning to join us here and give us input, because this is your neighborhood, and we've been studying it in detail for about 6 or 7 weeks now. We don't know it as well as many of you, so we are really appreciative of you all taking time out of your day to be here and share your local knowledge and your values and interests in this project. So thank you very much for joining us. And Jeff, I think we're actually not set up as co-hosts right now, so I can't share my screen if...
Yep. Perfect. You should both be now able to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So again, thank you everyone for joining us here today. We've been looking at a project which we're calling the Plains to School, which is a conceptual design for a shared use path for Easthampton students and residents. As Jeff mentioned, this current project builds off of a project that was begun last year in 2019 by another team of Conway School students that was looking on kind of the town-wide scale of different connections that could be made between the various neighborhoods of Easthampton, especially for pedestrians and bicyclists. And for this current project, we will be focusing on this southern spur that was identified as part of this project, with the goal of White Brook School and Nonotuck Park, and taking advantage of some conserved open spaces, both city-owned and otherwise, that could be linked together to form a new trail, which would benefit both students in getting to the school, as well as just provide a recreational opportunity for residents in general. So as you all know, the new K-8 school at the site of the existing middle school is opening in 2022. And in the Plains, there are currently 227 K-8 students, which is 15% of all Easthampton K-8 students. There are also 14 high school students living in the Plains. Based on our initial survey results from the responses we have so far, of people who have traveled between the Plains and White Brook School, either on foot or by bicycle, almost 40% of those people reported not feeling safe doing so on the existing routes. So that sort of highlights the importance of perhaps providing a route in which all people in the Plains do feel safe getting to the school or getting to Nonotuck Park, eventually maybe getting to more central parts of Easthampton. And because it is focusing on providing a safe route to school, this project would very likely be eligible for several state funding sources, including the Mass DOT Safe Routes to School. Some criteria for that are that any infrastructure improvements are located within a 2-mile radius of the new school, which is all the areas in the green circle you can see in this graphic. And that any infrastructure also be universally accessible, which we'll talk about in more detail a little later on. This trail could also be eligible for funding under the Mass Trails Grant, and some specific criteria of these that make a project more likely to receive funding is it's what's called an experiential trail, creating diverse recreational experiences and connecting users to the natural world, as well as providing connection to existing routes. And the strong applications for these funding sources will be able to demonstrate that there has already been some significant prior planning and thought going into the project, as well as that there is some community support for the project. So that is kind of the stage of the project we are at now, is doing this preliminary assessment of the feasibility of this path, considering alternatives, and soliciting community feedback from everyone so that we can make sure that the designs that we're suggesting represent the desires of the Plains community and Easthampton in general. So the primary plan that is being considered is an accessible nature path that would connect Plain Street to the Whitebrook School and Nonotuck Park, with another spur that would connect this section of trail to another trailhead along Park Street. Here in green, you can see all of the existing sidewalks in the area, and notably, as you all are aware, I'm sure, there is a lack of any kind of sidewalk along Plain Street, as well as Strong Street, Phelps Street, Hendrick Street, and Pomeroy Street. Some initial responses from the survey we've had have discussed which streets people feel unsafe walking or biking on. So you can see Park Street, Strong Street, Plain Street, and Hendrick Street are all highlighted, and the numbers along those routes correspond to the number of comments we've had in the survey so far, indicating people not feeling safe along those routes. And some of the language people have used to describe these are fast, narrow, busy, loud, and no sidewalks. So in sort of understanding the distribution of existing sidewalks, we have determined that this shared use path beginning on Plain Street, going through the open spaces, is it really needs to be supported by improvements to infrastructure on existing streets in the Plains, in order for it to be useful for people and a viable connection. So at minimum, we would be suggesting infrastructure improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists along Plain Street, as well as potentially along Strong Street, and perhaps some of the other streets that have been mentioned. So we're going to try to distribute a poll question here. So hopefully the technology goes smoothly. Let's see, Walker, Jeff, I'm not getting my polling box to—
Can do it.
Okay, thank you, Walker. All right, so hopefully you all just saw a little poll window appear on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be able to select which of these streets you're most interested in seeing improvements in infrastructure for pedestrians and bicyclists.
And not to test everyone's ability, but I also just sent a chat to just ask if everyone can access the poll. So I've got a yes from somebody, and I got 2 yeses. Okay, so that's working. Lots of yeses. Thank you. That's great.
Right, it looks like about 70%, 75% of folks in attendance have voted. We'll leave the polling open for about another 30 seconds or so to give anyone else a chance to submit some feedback there. Okay. Looks like most of us have gotten a chance to vote, so I'm going to see if we can display the results here. All right. Walker, is this window showing up for everyone? Oh, here we go, share results.
Yep. And we might mention that you can add in the chat. If you were not able to poll, you can add in the chat if you have a preference.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, someone mentioned a technical glitch when they tried to submit the poll. We did get 22 of the 28 people. So I'm not sure what the technical glitch was, but we'll pay attention to that for the next one.
Okay, so it looks like many people, or many of these streets have some support for increased infrastructure. Looks like Park Street is the most popular, followed by Plain Street, Strong Street, Hendrick Street, and Line Street. So that's fantastic. Thanks. We have a sense of what people are thinking with that. All right, Walker, do you want to talk about this?
Yep. So in addition to considering this shared use nature path through these open space parcels, we're also looking at potential alternatives that follow existing roadways, primarily the addition of a side path on Park Street that would connect directly to the school, Park and Line Street. And next slide. A potential that would follow Brook Street and connect through Nonotuck Park through to the school as well, through some of the open space parcels. These would offer a sort of more direct connection to the school, but they do lack the sort of experiential nature character of the original plan.
So we'll go ahead and share a second polling question here, just sort of preliminarily to, oh, no, let's see, we're gonna do that a little bit later.
Yeah, we're gonna do it a little later.
But preliminary feedback from the survey responses we've received so far, asking the question, which route would you be most likely to use? About 75% of respondents expressed a preference for the first alternative, the shared use nature path through the open parcels, followed by, in about equal preference, the Park Street alternative and the Brook Street alternative, though both of those are there's significantly less interest demonstrated in those routes in our initial polling than the shared use nature path.
Here are some examples of the type of infrastructure we are exploring, anywhere from a standard sidewalk next to an existing roadway, a separated side path that is separated by the roadway by at least 5 feet in addition to a guardrail or other barrier, or a shared use path that is entirely separate from roads, wide enough to allow full usage by bikes and pedestrians, 2 lanes, and going through natural areas. We're also looking into the addition of bike lanes on existing roads, which is usually a painted bike patching or sign of some sort to indicate where bikes are likely to ride. So we're going to do, here's where we're going to do this second poll. If you have a preference for which of these infrastructure you might prefer seeing in the Plains or elsewhere in Easthampton, I think you can choose more than one.
Walker and Galen, so there's a comment coming in. It's as soon as you click the checkbox and go to submit, your check disappears. And I don't know, from my end, I can't see because it's as the host, it looks different. Do you know what happens when people check the boxes? It just disappear and it's counted?
I believe that means it's counted. We're also seeing the host version though, so I'm a little unclear. We have 25 of 28 responses right now.
Yeah, it looks like most, I apologize to anyone who is maybe experiencing some technical difficulties. Hopefully your vote is still coming through, even if it might look a little odd. But yes, it seems like we have 25 out of 28 people have submitted their responses. So I will go ahead and share results. Yeah, so looks like there's significant interest in an accessible nature trail, a separated side path, and sidewalks, and significantly less interest in bike lanes or just painted lanes on the street, though there's still some interest. And interestingly, looks like none of us in attendance here are not interested in seeing some sort of improvement for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure.
We had a good question pop up in the chat as we go through this. So can we discuss and you might do this if you're going to do it, that's fine, just say that, but the material for a shared use path the nature path would be improved to some extent.
We actually are going to discuss a little more details of how the path would be made.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit.
So here's the same question presented to the survey that we had out with somewhat similar results. Here, the nature trail is called a shared use path, which got the majority of results, and the side path was the second runner-up. Bike lane had less support, although still support.
So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the area where the shared use nature path is being proposed. So just to orient you, you can see Plain Street running east to west at the bottom of the map, Park Street running north to south, and the Whitebrook School at the top. Nonotuck Park is up here in the northeast. So the parcels highlighted in green are city-owned parcels that are being conserved as open space, starting with Nonotuck Park and the Nonotuck Park Addition. Just south of there is a parcel that's known as the Holly Circle open space, which currently doesn't have any trails on it. A lot of that is a wet area. And then with an entrance off of Plain Street is the Justina Conservation Area, which is 9 acres acquired in 2005 with the help of the Pascomet Conservation Trust. This 25-acre parcel just north of the Justina Conservation Area is owned by a local farming family and is protected under an agricultural preservation restriction, which has restrictions about what kind of, basically that there can't be development on that land that detracts from its agricultural potential. And the city currently does have an easement through this APR parcel, which again, the Pascomet Conservation Trust has helped to negotiate. And the family that owns this parcel has been in contact with Jeff and others in Easthampton, and they have some interesting ideas about what they would like to see on this parcel. So it will be a conversation with them going forward about any potential path through here. These parcels highlighted in orange are solar projects. The larger parcel to the north, the solar array is currently being installed, and the city has acquired an easement, trail easement to traverse this parcel here on the eastern side. The southern parcel, development has not begun there yet, and likely the city would not need any easement through that parcel given that the Justina conservation land connects through there. So this is a closer look at the proposed path where it might go through this area. It would be approximately 1.5 miles long and give people access to about 100 acres of open space that there isn't very much access to at the moment, and provide connections to the Whitebrook School and Nonotuck Park. And the goals of our current study are to assess the feasibility of an accessible shared use path along this proposed route, and to create conceptual designs that comply with the Architectural Barriers Act standards of accessibility for the trailheads on Plain Street and Park Street, for some sample path segments, and for any stream and wetland crossings that the path might need to take. And our final goal, or another goal, is to minimize any negative impact to local ecosystems and hydrology of constructing a path through this area. And finally, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we are considering alternative routes and considering the pros and cons and merits of different connections between the Plains and the Whitebrook School. And this path would be for students, to give students a new route to school, but hopefully it would also be of great use to many Easthampton residents for recreation, for a diverse set of uses, from walking and jogging. The path would be universally accessible so that folks using wheelchairs, strollers, any other type of mobility aid should be able to use it, and would be open to bicyclists, including electrically assisted bikes. To give a little historical context of this area that the proposed trail is passing through, the photo in black and white in the center of your screen is an aerial image taken in 1942, and you can see that the majority of this land is cleared for agricultural use. You can see there are some streets overlaid over the graphic to give you a sense of where the current neighborhoods are. So this is Treehouse Circle and Button Drive. This is Holly Circle, and Kingsbury Way down here. Looking about 20 years later, in 1962, the land is still largely clear. 1975 was the year that the Whitebrook School was constructed. You can see there's still lots of open space around there. Jumping forward to 1990, you can see that development is beginning. Some houses here on Laurel Street or Laurel Drive have been constructed, and there's construction going on Kingsbury Way. Jumping forward to 2001, more development has taken place here on Kingsbury Way, as well as Holly Circle. And here in 2005, development has continued. The year after this photo was taken, the Button Drive, River Valley Way, and Treehouse Circle were developed. This is jumping forward to 2018. And then in 2019, some of you may have had the opportunity to see roughly in the area where this red square is, that's the northern solar parcel, solar project, and most of the trees shown in this photo have been cleared for that solar array.
And now we're going to do a quick closer up sort of photo tour of what it will look like, so you can get an idea of actually what these parcels look like from the ground, what it might be like to hike through them. So this is a street view of the Park Street. There will be an access road here for the solar field. And then the trail would continue through probably a little bit more into the trees than this photo shows in the Gustina Conservation Area.
Sorry, that first one was Plain Street, right? I think you said Park,
yes.
But it was Plain.
Did I say Park? Plain.
Okay.
To the left is the solar field. Here we are going through the APR pasture, which the trail, and this is a view from the pasture of Mount Tom. The exact route of the trail here is yet to be determined, but you could potentially take advantage of the view. Here it goes out onto Holly Circle for a short distance before going back into the Holly Circle wetland open space. Next slide. This is the wetland area. This picture was taken early in the spring. On future visits, it was not nearly this wet, but some consideration would need to be taken into account for the poorly draining soils here. Past the wetland area, there is a mature hemlock grove, has been in existence. It was in all of the photos, all the historical photos. So these are some pretty old trees, much drier than the previous area. The trail then passes past the current Park Street solar site and enters the Nonotuck Park extension, where it skirts a vernal pool. There's already a sort of unofficial trail along this area. And past here, it enters this site, which is has a mound of fill from the dredging of Nashawanak Pond about 10 years ago. The trail would probably skirt around the mound of fill and then enter into the onto River Valley Way, where it could follow the existing sidewalk through the community to the school site. And here you can see the existing school as well as the new school being constructed behind it. That's Brady. Here we start at Park Street, where there is a potential trailhead. You would go down this slope and into the woods, where it would pass through another lovely wetland area, a stream, through an open woodland, early successional woodland where there used to be farm fields here, and again out into this site where the fill mound is located.
The accessibility guidelines laid out by the Architectural Barriers Act and AASHTO state that for a shared use path like this, the ideal width would be at least 10 feet wide with 2-foot shoulders on either side. The running slope, or the slope that is in line with the direction of travel, should be less than 5%, though it can be steeper for limited sections, provided that there are adequate flat places for people to take a break. And the cross slope, or the slope that is perpendicular to the direction of movement, should be less than 2%. The path should be composed of a firm and stable surface. So options that are being considered for that, asphalt is pretty typical to be used. It can be one of the lowest cost options compared to concrete, or there are some other options that could be a little bit have lower environmental impact, including a path that is just sort of packed earth or stone, can still be considered accessible under certain conditions. There are also some options of sort of permeable paver materials that allow water to penetrate through the path, though those options are typically more expensive. Walker, did you want to?
There are also some design constraints to consider in this area. The first is that the existing easement through the APR is only 8 feet wide, which is not as wide as ideal, but probably still wide enough for a functional path. And another one is the wellhead protection area. There's a community groundwater well on the Nonotuck Park extension, which has a 400-foot protection area regulated by the Department of Environmental Protection. May have some limits to what's possible within this area. In addition, disturbance within resource protection areas would require approval from the local conservation commission. This includes 100-foot buffers around delineated wetlands and 200-foot buffers from perennial streams. So we took a look at some of the ecological analyses of this area to determine how feasible a path would be and what sort of issues we might run into. This includes looking at the soil types, hydrology of the area, sort of the wildlife and vegetation communities, as well as the slopes. To begin with, we looked at the soil types. These different colors indicate a bunch of different types of soil. The important thing to note here is the red hatched areas indicate soils that are poorly drained and could indicate a challenge to path installation or maintenance, because they might be more likely to flood or have ponding issues in the springtime. And looking at the hydrology, we can see that this is also where the streams and wetlands in the area are found. These areas do have regulations as to what is available, and we would need to be permitted, as well as care taken to ensure that these ecosystems are not negatively impacted by the trail, ensure that water flow and animal connectivity is still possible. Taking a closer look at the wildlife and vegetation, we noted several different natural communities along the trail. As seen in the historical slides, these are all young, except for the hemlock grove. These are young, early, immature forests, and as a result, there are invasive plants in some areas of the trail that may require some maintenance. But there are also some valuable ecosystems in this area, and we would want to ensure that the path protected and even enhanced these natural areas, as well as being able to educate people about them so that they keep taking care of them and protecting them. We also saw a lot of deer paths as well as other animals passing through the area. So again, we would consider the impacts of a path on the potential connectivity and the ability of animals to move through this region.
So the topography of the landscape, specifically looking at the areas where there are steep slopes, is important in order to determine whether or how easy it would be or what challenges there might be in creating a trail that meets those specifications for universal accessibility. And there's one area that presents the most challenges is the Park Street segment of the trail over here. So starting immediately at Park Street, there's an area of 150 feet that has an average grade of 7%. And the area directly adjacent to the road is as steep as anywhere from 10 to 15%. And given that the width of the lot where it intersects with Park Street is only 50 feet wide, that could present some significant challenges for creating switchbacks or regrading the land in order to create a surface with gentler slopes for the path. A little further in along that wetland, there's about a 30-foot wide band on the western side of the wetland with a significant slope of up to 15%. Though towards the northern edge of the parcel, the slope is less severe and narrower. And finally, on the after crossing a second branch of White Brook, there's a hill that ascends from White Brook back to where that large mound of fill from the dredging is, that has an average grade of 7% and exceeds 14% in places.
So in summary, there are many assets along this potential path. There's beautiful views, a lot of natural scenery, and the potential to connect this neighborhood to the school and the park. There are some challenges, however, such as wetlands or steep slopes, as well as connecting people to the path. Next. So we've highlighted 3 areas that we feel are potentially the most challenging: the lack of access to the trailhead due to lack of infrastructure on Plain Street, the central area where there's a large wetland on the Holly Circle wetland, and the Park Street section where it is both steep and wet. So there are designs. We'll kind of begin to focus in on these areas to show how these challenges could be overcome.
Can I jump into, and there's a couple property owners who are in close proximity to the concept of the trails. So that is, something that we are, thinking about. It could be a design constraint. It's an issue where we're beginning the discussions with property owners who are closest to this. So I just wanted to, I know that the slides didn't really represent that, but it is something that, is in the, in the thought process here. So
yeah,
a couple of those people are on the call. So I do want to acknowledge that there are some areas that it gets close to home.
Yeah, we do take that into consideration.
Thank you.
So now we're going to do another quick question. Considering this path, what would be the most important to you? Protecting the environments in this area, keeping path users safe, reducing the project cost, or something else that you might think of? So yeah, start the poll. Give a couple minutes for people to answer. If you have another suggestion, feel free to put it in the chat. It looks like we've got 90% of participants. We'll just give it a couple more seconds. Anybody else wants to answer? So it looks like safety is the primary concern along this path, followed closely by protecting the environment in this area. We do have a question in the chat. I see if the park spur poses a challenge, could or would the project continue without that piece? And yeah, we have considered that as an option. The path could be successful without that spur, I believe.
And I'll just acknowledge that there are a couple other questions that have come through, and we'll try to address them in a little bit. I think we'll kind of go through a round of questions.
Yeah. All right, so following all of that, we are presenting some design alternatives here. The primary design follows the original shared use nature path conception, connecting to Plain Street, Park Street, the school, and potentially also to Nonotuck Park. We also present the possibilities of a connection along Brook Street and Park Street, as mentioned previously. So the shared use nature path, this design offers gathering spaces along the path that could be used for picnics, resting areas, or even outdoor classrooms. It offers the most natural and beautiful setting to pass through, as well as potential education about these natural communities. And it would include sidewalks, bike lanes, or side path of some sort along Plain Street to ensure access to the trailhead. Some constraints of this path are the steep slopes of areas along Park Street, as well as the wetland on Holly Circle, that could involve an extensive boardwalk or other method of crossing the wetland with minimal impact. And then there is, of course, more potential for ecological impacts with this path. So we are going to, next, I think, yeah, we're going to take a look a little bit closer at this Holly Circle section to see what it could look like. So here's a potential idea of how the trail could go along here. This involves an extensive boardwalk through the middle of the wetland that connects to this older hemlock grove, which is drier. Despite being shown as a wetland here, our research has shown that it seems to remain dry and would not require the boardwalk. The boardwalk would be constructed in a way to minimize impact to the wetland area. And this second alternative has a much shorter boardwalk and skirts along the edge of the wetland. It is much closer to the property line, but would involve less impact to the wetland directly. And here's a quick example of how this could look through the hemlock area. And we also, yeah.
We're going to also take a closer look at this second main wetland crossing area along the Park Street segment. So in this design, the trail would descend from Park Street and skirt towards the northern edge of this Nonotuck parcel where the that band of steep slopes is narrowest. In this concept, there's a side spur on the trail which leads to an observation platforms with benches and interpretive signs about the local ecosystem. This could be used as a picnic area or gathering area, or as an outdoor classroom for the school nearby. The trail would cross a 60-foot boardwalk across the wetland, and then follow the topographical contours, and a shorter stretch of boardwalk to cross the second branch of the White Brook stream here before ascending the hill back up towards the fill site. And here's an image of what the path might look like through this area of open woodland. And here is a rendering of what the experience of traversing that wetland on the boardwalk could be like.
Although I'd like to note that this picture does not include the railings, which would be a required addition to the boardwalk to make it accessible.
Yes. So as we mentioned earlier, we feel that this connection along Plain Street is essential for this path for there to be safe access to this path. Here is an image of what a separated side path could look like. And the dimensions of the city-owned right-of-way here would accommodate, there's about a 20-foot width from the roadway on the south side of Plain Street that the side path could be accommodated within. Thinking about construction of boardwalks, we're still looking at a variety of construction options, but this option, which is mounted on what are called helical piles, seems to be a promising option for minimal disturbance to the wetland. So the helical piles are just a narrow metal pole with a screw-like helix on the end of it that secures directly into the wetland soils, but typically presents less disturbance than mounting wooden posts within the wetland. So we'd like to ask another question now about if there are sort of any amenities or other features that you would be interested in seeing included along this trail, including outdoor classrooms, picnic areas, community garden. There is a consideration for a small parking lot that could accommodate 4 or 5 cars at the at the Plain Street trailhead. So let me go ahead and share this. It looks like we don't actually have a polling question prepared for this one. So let's see, if you'd like to give some feedback on this, please please share your thoughts in the chat for now. And let's see, we know that, as we saw in the poll earlier, that safety of trail users is a significant concern. And in discussion with some community stakeholders, there have been a number of methods proposed for making sure that especially children are safe when using this path if it is intended to be a safe route to school. Some of these options include having volunteers serve as crossing guards at busy roads during times when children are going to school or leaving school. Another option would be having adult volunteers escort groups of school children on bicycle to and from school at sort of coordinated times. One consideration is whether there should be lighting along this path as a safety concern, or if you have any other suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
Sorry, I think I just tried to launch the poll. I saw some people trying to answer the second part of that, so I launched the poll, if that's okay.
I see it,
Yep.
yeah.
That's great. Thank you. All right, it looks like about 70% of folks have responded. Let's give it another 30 seconds in case anyone is still working on submitting their answers. Okay, we have about 75% of folks responding now. So it looks like there is significant support for the different volunteer positions that would assist kids in navigating any of the parts of the trail that might be more difficult. Some significant support for lighting and some support, but less for call boxes.
And I'm seeing in the chat that there's some discussion about lighting being disruptive to people who live nearby or to wildlife. We were considering the option of whether it's possible to have lighting that's on a timer, so it only goes on times when the path would be more likely to be used, or some other way to make the lighting less disruptive to wildlife or likely to attract people in the middle of the night.
Walker, do you want to share the Park Street alternative?
Yep. So here's a quick look at the Park Street side path alternative. So this does avoid the open space and wetland areas and has a lot less permitting and environmental constraints. And there's also an existing sidewalk on Park Street that could be expanded into a side path. Some cons are, of course, that it doesn't pass through these natural areas. There's no educational or experiential option for this path. It would be right next to the road, probably hotter and noisier, and you would still require a sidewalk on Plain Street at least in order to benefit people throughout the neighborhood. And we have a picture here of what this could look like along the side of Park Street.
And the final alternative that makes use of existing streets, as well as some more natural areas through Nonotuck Park here is would take advantage of Brook Street, which parallels the path to the east of the proposed nature trail. And Brook Street is a pretty quiet street with a cul-de-sac. There is an existing sort of informal connection to Nonotuck Park here and some existing informal trails that are not currently universally accessible, but that could return by the fill site and River Valley Way again by the to the school. Some pros of this are that it avoids some of the wetland areas and involves less permitting and environmental constraints. It might make this sort of informal connection to Nonotuck Park a little easier for some people to use and connect more directly. Some cons, there may be some steep areas in this area that would need to be examined a little bit more closely. And there could be some negotiations with DPW about the wellhead protection area. And this is sort of a middle alternative between the nature path and the Park Street side path that would offer a combination of some natural settings and some road. I will say that from our preliminary analysis, or from our preliminary results from the survey feedback, this route has been the least popular, and people have expressed, some people have said that it wouldn't be particularly useful to them because Brook Street starts so far to the east. Some people have said that there is no need to improve any infrastructure on Brook Street, given that that it tends to be a quiet street. Some people have expressed concerns about attracting more traffic to this area. But I will also note that along with it, if it was decided that one of these on-street alternatives was more promising than the nature trail, there could still be options for citing some sort of less formal foot trail or walking path, possibly accessible throughout some of these open space parcels. And there are a couple of examples of what different types of infrastructure options that could be installed on Brook Street, whether it's just a painted line or something with some separators here, though, again, as I mentioned, we've had a lot of feedback from people thinking that given the lack of traffic on this road, that infrastructure may not be necessary to make it safer. So we would just like to conclude with, now that we've taken a closer look at these three alternatives, we're going to share a polling question just to get a sense of which options people are most interested in seeing move forward.
And as someone commented in the chat, you don't have to commit to one plan in its entirety. They could be mixed and matched. They could be combined in various ways potentially. But at this point, we just like to know if you have a preference for one idea more than the other.
Looks like we have just under 80% of folks have responded, so we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. So if you are still waiting to respond, please go ahead and submit that. All right. So the preliminary feedback is 15 folks here in the meeting are most interested in considering the shared use path option. Second most popular, or the second that people are interested in is the Park Street side path option, followed by the Brook Street and Nonotuck Park connection, and a couple of people who are not interested in seeing any of these options move ahead. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing your feedback. I see we have a lot of comments going on in the chat. So let's see, Jeff, would we like to, can you sort of moderate a Q&A for us through the chat?
Yeah, this is definitely the imperfect part of doing the virtual meeting, but I do want to say a couple quick things. So this has been great. The chats, you know, I meant to say this at the beginning. The chats, you know, we keep these, so we have access to these chats. So if we can't give you a specific answer right now, it's something that goes into all the evaluations. And the key part of this is that the survey, you know, there's still a survey open. So, you know, my observation is that we're not relying on Facebook by itself. We're not relying on just this virtual meeting by itself, but we did send out, you know, mailers to a lot of people, and we've gotten really good survey responses. So that when I checked this morning, there were, you know, approximately 140. I did have a question for Walker and Galen about how long do you think we can keep the survey open and still have it work with what you have to do to put together a report? Can we give a ballpark of how long we might keep the survey open?
Yeah, I think, I mean,
even if it's just another, you know, several days or a week.
Yeah, certainly a week, I would say.
yeah,
We're
I think
done with it by the end of the month. So.
Okay. So maybe like I'll put something out for information, but maybe let's say, you know, Friday, June 12th, we'll kind of close the survey. I did see a question about the slides. So we can definitely make them available. This video has been recorded, so I will work with Easthampton Media to get that, you know, something that we can share so that other people can see it. So we got a lot of questions, and some of this, you know, it's so early in the idea phase that we won't have solid answers, but I do want to assure people that, you know, the purpose of this meeting and the survey is so that the Conway School will produce a report which would become some kind of reference point or a guide for us to move forward. So I think the idea of lighting is where I think we can just start with, it's a challenging question. It's something that's going to need a lot of consideration. I do want to remind people that, you know, all of our public trails are open at all times, and it's really sort of a user's discretion as to when they might use a trail. The lights on the Manhan Rail Trail, if you look at the overall timeline of that project, they're new. You know, they started getting installed in 2015, and the issue, I think, that will be balancing safety with actual cost is that adding lighting would be really expensive. And so I do think the expectation would be that, you know, we might not have lighting on this trail. And I think for most of the users who would access it, I think school children don't usually start to approach a school, you know, in the morning while it's dark. And I think the evenings in the fall and winter, you know, they're usually done with school. So we do have to talk about lighting. I think it's a substantial issue that people raise, and I don't think we have a solid answer. I think there was a comment about crossing guards and that they are actually paid positions. So that's very important to note. But the previous discussions around the idea of a crossing guard is that right now, you know, they're deployed at Center Pepin and Maple Street schools in the mornings and the afternoons, and when those schools are no longer in use, it would be great to be able to move those positions or those people in those paid positions over to kind of how will we adapt to having the new school in one central place. There was a question about taxes. How will it impact taxes? So, you know, generally speaking, and there was another question about the funding source. Safe Routes to School funds large projects, and just looking back a little bit at what they have funded, the more creative the type of project and the more that it creates essential connections, the more likely that they would fund something. So, you know, one of our local funding sources that would probably come into play at some point would be Community Preservation Act funds. So those funds are collected from tax, from tax revenue and sales, but they have to be used for certain purposes, one of which is open space and recreation. So oftentimes CPA will not fund an entire project, but they can fund design, or they can provide some matches. When a grant gets submitted, sometimes they require a match. But the idea is that this would be funded through sources intended to provide access. And I think we have the compelling argument now with the school under construction that, the safe routes to school is an important thing to consider. Maybe I'm going through, this is the hardest part of going virtual. There was a question about property owners that I saw. We do identify that, particularly in the Holly Circle area, there are a couple property owners who would be in close proximity to a potential trail. There are no required setbacks. We don't have any regulations that would dictate that, but we would have, if this is a conceptual visioning session. So from here, as we move forward, we would definitely have to have more detailed discussions with property owners. And, it is complex because there is a question whether there would be a trail next to, and, that's the main question. But then what kind of design features could be worked in, or locations that could be picked that might be better or more suitable for property owners. So that's something that I think we're not at that stage yet. But as this progressed, we would probably have to have specific discussions with key property owners. There was a question about the property on Plain Street. So right now, the Castina Conservation Area doesn't really have a driveway or a parking area. And I think that's long been a discussion as to how best people could access that. I think that I wasn't around when this happened, but there was a project for solar that has already been approved. My understanding is that they are coming back to have the permit renewed. But for awareness, the solar project would have a access road built in that location that would bring access through from Plain Street to their solar property, and it could also be potentially used to provide access to the Castina parcel and presumably be part of a trailhead. So that is something that that's one of the property owners that would be involved in more intimate discussions as we go. Walker or Galen, are there any other questions? I'm sure there are other questions, but should we be a little bit more strategic as to questions we might want to tackle? Did you see any that you want to talk through?
I did see one question, or maybe several questions about how the trail would be maintained, which is one area that Walker and I, we would like to be able to make some recommendations about that. And it's not something we've thought about very carefully up to this point. But I guess I would just be curious for you, Jeff, about how the rail trail is currently maintained, and especially I think in the winter, what kind of maintenance happens there?
Yeah, the rail trail has a committee, so it's a city committee that has been established to, has oversight of the trail and its maintenance. And so my understanding is that they rely on a very small general fund, allocation, and then donations. And, I think, there was a comment that just popped up. So, I would disagree that the rail trail is completely neglected. Oh, it says in the winter. So thank you. Yeah, there's long been a discussion about the rail trail in the winter. And so, that is where additional funding is necessary to provide a person or people to get out and clear the trail. The conversations that I've heard is that we get questions about liability. So once we sort of propose to have the trail open and available in the winter, then we the city may accept some liability about making sure that there's no ice or other, dangerous conditions on it. Over the past couple of years, there have been, a couple parties that have decided to clean the trail of snow and try to do the maintenance. And I think, that is one option, is especially for the winter, is volunteer maintenance plan, and then just making sure that there's a way to consistently do it so that users would have, an understanding that it would be predictability that the trail is going to be usable. So we have not gotten there yet with the rail trail. So for all intents and purposes moving forward, the idea of this multi-use path would be likely that it would be not usable in the winter, at least for bikes. So you could imagine cross-country skis or something. There could be winter amenities and ways people could utilize the area in winter, but I would expect our beginning discussions that would be that it wouldn't be maintained in the winter. Were there anything else? I'm sure there's others, but can we kind of walk through some of this? I'm having a hard time talking and going through the questions at the same time.
There's discussion about the wetland area, which just is concerns about getting across it. And that's just going to take some more research on our part to determine how feasible that is and how we could do that without impacting it too much.
Yeah. That's an important one. It's complicated, but it is also this project, could serve to provide access to open space that we don't currently have access to, and so that's a goal that's in our master plan for the city and our open space and recreation plan. The site that I have in my mind as a visual reference is in the town of Hadley. And it's the Silvio Conti Wildlife Refuge area. And so, that's a project that it's not a straight, traversing, we're not trying to get to point A to point B, but it's an involved elevated boardwalk system over wetlands, and it's super popular. And it's handicapped accessible, has railings. And so there are models that could be applied to this, it's mainly one or two sections. That's a lot of the scenario that we have to keep pursuing in the future to examine that. Let's see. Did we have?
So there was a question earlier from a little ways back regarding the fill site and the siting of the path within that. So the question is, has putting the path on the south end of the property farther away from the abutters on Treehouse Circle been considered? And I think the answer to that question, the idea has come up. We've been routing, in our visions, we've been routing the trail around the north side because there is sort of an existing trail along there that is level, whereas along kind of, with the exception of the northern part of the property, most of that site is taken up by that fill, that mound of fill, though it certainly could be moved or regraded to accommodate the trail in a different location with some added expenses of the earth moving probably.
Yep, and I think a key component of this is opening up open spaces that we have already. I was just going through the comments, and there was a question about community gardens and sort of picnic areas. I know that we are in the early stages of talking to certain property owners, and so the owners of the APR, the Agricultural Protection Area, they seem generally supportive of the idea, in that they have similar ideas to use that land for agricultural purposes and educate people as to what's going on. I mean, I think the graphics of showing how this area was historically farmland, I think is important. And I think at the end of the day, even if this becomes just a hiking trail, if we can do a hiking trail through here with educational opportunities throughout, that would be really important. And that's clearly a goal throughout our existing plans is to give people access and to our open spaces. And in terms of agriculture, there's a lot of opportunity to educate people about what's happening in these areas. I think I think people are asking about how to stay involved or get information. There was one question about non-electronic, opportunities, and so that is our biggest challenge, to get people actual paper materials for this. But I think if we can get people to a website that's what we have right now, and it's easthamptonma.gov. So that's always the beginning of Easthampton's web pages. And then we have /Plains to School. And so right now that's where we have the surveys available. That's where I'll make, the slides available. I'll make the video available there. And we also have sort of some of that background information is available there. And so it's one of our biggest challenges is how to communicate with people that we just don't have the resources to print. It's too cost prohibitive. So if I can help, direct people to those areas, that's what I would like to commit myself to trying to help. I think we're winding down. I'll accept the one last, any other questions that we want to tackle, but I think, the survey, if you haven't taken it, it's an opportunity for you to answer a lot of the same questions, and you can provide comments in the survey. And if you know somebody who you think, based on hearing about this, should take the survey, let's try to help, get that information to them. That's the best we can try to do, is get a word of mouth thing. Walker or Galen, from what you've heard or seen in the chats, do you think we should cover anything else?
Yeah, we have a suggestion here to add further responses potentially to some of the issues raised in the chat to the website as we do more research. So that's.
Yeah, and I think the goal will really be to take the feedback. I think Walker and Galen will take the feedback, and it will get addressed and incorporated into the final report. And so I think that's definitely the way we'll handle it. This project has a pretty quick turnaround. So like by mid-July, we should be able to access a report that captures these discussions and the issues raised and the pros and cons. There was a question about what the Conway School is. So maybe on a closing note, you can say that. And then I just really want to thank people for spending, this time with us. This is really important. So Walker and Galen, do you want to give a little quick close up and just about how you're going to handle the rest of the report?
Yeah, so right quick, the Conway School is a school based in Northampton that teaches ecological design and planning. It's a small master's program. We have 17 students total in our school, and we do projects with real clients throughout the year, like real clients, we do real projects that will actually benefit people in our community. So yeah, thanks for all coming and helping. We will take this feedback, and our aim is to have a report that's most useful as possible to this community and to this neighborhood so that the best possible decision can be made. And yeah, we'll just be sure to continue to read the survey responses as they come in and take all of that into consideration. I don't know if you have anything to add, Galen.
No, I don't think so. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. And I guess just on a personal note, I think this area of Easthampton between the Plains and Nonotuck Park is a really wonderful, beautiful part of town. And as a cyclist and pedestrian myself, I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk with you all about what you'd like to see in your community. So thank you very much for helping participate in this process and for allowing Walker and I to have the opportunity to help create some visions for this area.
That's great. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to end the meeting in a second, and so it'll just drop off, but I really appreciate it. It's been great. So thank you all very much.